This book was banned for a century. It wasn't because of violence, but because of an idea so dangerous they didn't want you to think it. In 1899, critics called this text poison. Libraries refused to shelf it. The author was socially destroyed and never wrote a novel again. Why? Because she dared to write the one thing society couldn't handle: a happy ending for a monster. To understand why this story was so disturbing, you have to look at the world it was born into. Turn-of-the-century New Orleans was a place of high society, rigid etiquette, and the cult of domesticity. For a woman like Edna Pontellier, life was a set of prescribed roles. You were a social ornament first, and a mother second. You were legally and socially the property of your husband. The ideal woman of 1899 was expected to be a ministering angel, a person who had no desires, no dreams, and no identity outside of serving her family. This is where our story begins. Edna is the wealthy, respectable wife of a successful businessman, Léonce. He treats her like a prized piece of furniture. In one of the most telling scenes in the novel, he looks at his wife and sees her not as a human being, but as a valuable piece of personal property which has suffered some damage. But one summer, while vacationing on the Louisiana coast at Grand Isle, the cage begins to crack. The awakening starts with the sea. For years, Edna has been afraid of the water, but one night, under the moonlight, she finally learns to swim. This isn't just a physical act, it is a psychological birth. As she moves through the water, she realizes that she is in control of her own body. The vast, dark ocean doesn't care about her social standing or her marriage vows. In the water, she is just an individual. During this summer, she also meets Robert Lebrun. Robert is young and charming, and for the first time in years, Edna feels a spark of genuine passion. But here is the disturbing twist. The story isn't really about Robert. He's just the catalyst. Edna isn't falling for a man. She's falling for the idea of her own freedom. She starts to paint again, a hobby she had abandoned to be a good wife. She starts to ignore the rules of high society. She spends hours wandering the city alone. She is beginning to realize that she is a human being before she is a Mrs. Pontellier. When the summer ends and Edna returns to New Orleans, she doesn't go back to her old life. She refuses to receive visitors on Tuesdays, a massive insult to the social elite. She tells her husband she no longer wants to live in his grand mansion. She makes a move that was, in 1899, more shocking than murder. She rents a tiny house of her own nearby, which she calls the Pigeon House. She moves her belongings out of her husband's home. She earns her own money through her art. She even engages in a brief, purely physical affair with a man named Alcée Arobin. In any other book of that era, Edna would be portrayed as a villain or a tragic figure losing her mind. But Kate Chopin did something unforgivable. She portrayed Edna as sane and happy. She says the most dangerous line in the entire book: "I would give my life for my children, but I won't give myself." To the readers of the 19th century, this was heresy. The idea that a mother owned her soul and wouldn't sacrifice it for her children was seen as a biological and moral perversion. When The Awakening was published, the world didn't just disagree with it, they tried to erase it. The reviews were visceral. The St. Louis Republic wrote that the book was too strong a drink for moral babes. Critics called the protagonist sensual and unhealthy. The book was pulled from library shelves in Kate Chopin's hometown. Friends who had once praised her short stories now crossed the street to avoid her. Kate Chopin was a 48-year-old widow with 6 children to support. Writing was her livelihood. Because of the poison label attached to the book, her next novel contract was canceled. Magazines that once clamored for her work now sent her rejection letters. She was effectively blacklisted from the literary world in a matter of months. Broken by the backlash, her health began to fail. In a final, desperate attempt to defend her work, she wrote a sarcastic letter to the public, pretending to be surprised by her own character's behavior, but the damage was done. On August 20th, 1904, just 5 years after the book's release, she suffered a brain hemorrhage and died. She died believing she was a failure. The most disturbing part of the book, and the reason it was truly banned for so long, is the finale. Edna eventually realizes that the world she lives in has no place for a woman like her. Her lover, Robert, returns, but he is still a man of his time. He tells her he wants her to be his wife. He wants to own her, just as Léonce did. Edna sees that even if she is awakened, she will always be surrounded by people who want to put her back in a cage. She watches a friend go through a brutal, painful childbirth, which serves as a reminder of the biological trap that society uses to keep women in their place. She goes back to Grand Isle, where her awakening began. She stands on the beach, strips off all her clothes, symbolically casting aside the fictitious self society forced her to wear, and walks into the ocean. Critics for nearly 100 years called this a suicide of desperation. They said Edna lost, but if you read the story closely, it is a scene of liberation. Edna chooses the sea because it is the only place large enough to contain her freedom. She reclaims her body by giving it to the ocean. She refuses to be possessed by anyone ever again. It was a happy ending for a woman who refused to be a slave, and in 1899, that was the most disturbing idea imaginable. For over 60 years, The Awakening disappeared. It was a dead book by a forgotten author. It wasn't until the late 1960s that the book was rediscovered. Scholars found a copy and were stunned. They realized that Kate Chopin hadn't written a scandalous romance. She had written a psychological masterpiece that was 70 years ahead of its time. Today, it is a staple of American literature. We now see that the monster wasn't Edna. The monster was the society that tried to crush her. The story of The Awakening is a reminder of how much we fear people who refuse to play their assigned roles. Kate Chopin was destroyed because she told a story where a woman decided that her life belonged to herself. She proved that the most dangerous thing you can do is wake up in a world that wants you to stay asleep. The book is no longer banned, and it is no longer considered poison, but its ending still disturbs us today. It forces us to ask, if we were pushed to the edge, would we have the courage to choose ourselves, even if it meant walking into the sea? The Awakening was a book that killed her author's career, but it eventually changed the way we think about freedom. What do you think of Edna's choice? Was it a tragedy, or was it the only way she could truly be free? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want to hear more stories about the banned books that changed history, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell. Thank you for watching. Don't be afraid to find your own awakening.